Hey, Danny, thanks for your video, man, in week 10 and all your good work across the whole term. As you say, we're nearing the end of the road here, and I'm glad to hear you feel like it's been a good learning experience for you. It's a really difficult letter, as you know, but hopefully we've gotten some new frames and sensibilities as we've worked through it carefully. And as you say, what we have come across in this last week is no exception in terms of how important it is to situate familiar parts of Romans, really any part of Romans, but especially the parts that we've come to celebrate or refer to a lot, to situate those parts in the flow of the letter. And as you say, the chapter division between 12 and 13, I think, is most unfortunate because it really does give the impression of some kind of new subject rather than something that is just right in the flow of what Paul is saying at the end of chapter 12. I can't emphasize enough that there is no grammatical transition at the beginning of chapter 13. And so I think we have to try to read it as of a piece with what Paul is saying more broadly about how the community in Rome is to relate to um, the wider society that they're a part of. And that's going to include inevitably the authorities that are in place in that society. And Paul is counseling a generally sort of peaceable way of engaging that wider social fabric. Um, I I also appreciate something you're I think trying to uh, tease out here, and that is that what he's saying about the attitude towards authorities, even paying taxes, is not like some concession. This is where I think Grebe and others go a little bit astray in my judgment. It's not a concession, the need just to be like realistic because Rome is so powerful and this community is so meager and weak. We can only do so much. And Paul might say something different if we were talking about, a much more robust Christian community that could actually, um, afford to offer more robust resistance to empires. I don't think that is really fitting the flow of the letter here. I think that as you've suggested, what Paul says about the posture of the community towards the political authorities that are in power is of a piece with the wider neighborly life that he is encouraging the body of people that he's writing to practice. And I would go even farther and say that, and this does follow on some of what you're saying with Stubbs, that this is actually how the community offers resistance to empire. It's not a concession to corrupt imperial authority. It's actually the way to subvert it. Um, the community embodies greater power by uh, maintaining a certain attitude of respect, even when the political authority is corrupt and doesn't deserve it. That has the effect of exposing that authority for what it is more directly. It doesn't fuel that authority by offering it, you might say, an easy enemy, an easy rebellion that it can sort of build its own moral authority on the back of. That's not what the Christian community does. It actually, um, you might say, embodies its own moral political authority that makes it hard for corrupt governments to rule over it or to abuse it because they're being mistreated is hopefully so clearly unjustified. I think this is following in the path of Jesus that we find um, earlier in the New Testament, where Jesus uh, opposes authorities publicly, yes, but does not mobilize a kind of easy rebellion, meaning easy target to identify as something that is subverting the entire government and must be taken down. They don't have a militia. Um, they're not counseling open rebellion, even if Jesus is publicly opposing authorities, questioning them, exposing their hypocrisy, and yet forming a community of people that's clearly invested in the rest of the social fabric. Jesus goes so far as to urge them to remain subject to Pharisaic and scribal authorities because they sit on Moses's seat. That's Matthew 23. So, these are just, I think, patterns of resilience, sustainable, intergenerational political resistance under corrupt authorities that we want to learn from rather than some concession to empire given the, limits of the circumstances, et cetera. Now, this is not to deny that people like us are living in circumstances that are distinct, where we have, at least to some extent, ostensibly democratic institutions and electoral processes that we're involved in. And I think that you might say there is a way to express respect for established authorities while embodying a very stiff and public resistance in our context. And that might have been more difficult where there was a lack of, say, the right of assembly or other democratic institutions. But I still think that even in our context, we want to advocate for more just government. We want to agitate for more just government in a way that is not simply, shall we say, ridiculing the opposition, not filling our gatherings or our minds with bitterness towards political opponents, but actually trying to undermine unjust government, even in our context, by our ability to treat opponents with respect and to maintain a kind of attitude of concern for the entire social fabric that, for better or worse, does live in some dependence under the authority structures that are in place. And we want to be mindful of that in the way that we oppose them. And we want to be mindful, I think, of how our resistance to established authority affects us. That's why I think it's important that Paul urges subjection for the sake of conscience, what it's happening to our inner life in virtue of how we resist. I think our conscience can be hurt if we are bitter and hateful towards even corrupt authorities. And he also, of course, counsels leaving room for wrath. And that means the expectation that corrupt governments will be brought down. But we support that sort of degradation of bad authority by living justly ourselves and living with a certain respect, I think, even under corrupt governments. So hope that's helpful. Thanks again for your good work all term. I know you've been traveling and maybe the Zoom discussion times didn't work much. So I'm sorry we didn't get to do more live conversation, but glad you're able to participate in the course and hope to see you soon.